welcome back. Last time we were looking at Mary and Joseph and gaining an understanding of what was going on and the implications of Mary's pregnancy. And when we left off, John the Baptist has been born, and Mary leaves Zechariah and Elizabeth's home, and she goes back to Joseph. But what about Joseph? Right? What has he been doing these 3 months? Well, if we turn back to the Gospel of Matthew, when we look again at Matthew chapter 1, think about this. Joseph has been waiting for 3 months, and in Joseph's mind, right, Mary is gone forever. Right? He has no clue of where she has gone. And 3 months have passed. Joseph is sitting in the living room, and imagine, right, he's watching late night TV, right? He's watching the news, and he falls asleep in the armchair, and he has a dream. And in Matthew chapter 1, verse 20, it says this. He says, but after he had considered this, after he had considered what? After he had considered the divorce. It says this, verse 20, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. And all this took place, verse 22, to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. Verse 23, the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. Think about this. This boy will be God with us. And then Joseph woke up. He thought, oh, what have I done? All right, Joseph, he now understands the plan, but Mary is gone. Right, she's been gone for 3 months, and he has no idea where she has gone. He doesn't know if she's dead or alive, and so he thinks, man, what am I going to do? When suddenly, here's this knock on the door. Joseph gets up and he opens the door, and there's Mary standing there with her suitcase, and she's pregnant. Joseph grabs Mary, embraces her, and she brings her into the home. And you can imagine they just talk all night till daybreak. And we read in Matthew chapter 1 and verse 24, when Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him and took Mary home as his wife. And so Mary is back. Now we look back in the Gospel of Luke. Now we flip the page from Luke chapter 1 to Luke chapter 2, and it says this. It says, in those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. So now here's Luke again. Now he's going back and he's anchoring the events in history. And parenthetically, Luke, who thoroughly researched everything, right? He said this in verse 2. He says, this was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. Verse 3, and everyone went to their own town to register. And so Joseph also went out from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David. Why? Because he belonged to the house and line of David. And so Joseph is living in Nazareth, but he is from Bethlehem. And a census has been ordered, right? And that was a common thing in those days as well as today, right? And why do we take a census? Well, we do so to find out how many people are there and what the demographics of those people are. Why? So that the government can plan infrastructure, right? So they know where to build, where to build highways and hospitals and all those things necessary to support a society. And so you need to know how many people are there, and you need to know the demographics of your group in order for the government to function properly. And think about this, it's also used for the basis for taxing people, right? If you have all these people with this set of demographics and all these services have to be provided for these people, right? That is going to cost money. And so how much is it going to cost? Well, you figure out how many people there are and you divide that by the cost of all these projects that you have to do, right? And now you have the tax rates that you're going to set on the people, right? And that is why you do a census, right? And Caesar knew this. And so he regularly issued a census so that the government could function properly, right? The Roman government was a very efficient bureaucratic machine. And so the census is in order. Right? It's set in place. And everyone needed to be counted in their hometown. Now, why is that? Well, because in this period of time, people simply didn't move, right? If you were born in Bethlehem, you grew up in Bethlehem, and you married in Bethlehem, you had children in Bethlehem, and eventually you died in Bethlehem, right? During this period of time, people simply did not move, right? In this time, in this place, it was rare for a person to ever leave their home. Why? Because we talked about this before. In the cultural world of the Bible, family is absolutely central, right? It is the central unit, and you don't move away from family. And so you stayed with that family. Why? Because the bigger the family, the more prosperous the family, because all the resources are pulled together, and also the more influential that family becomes. And if you split the family up, then it destroys the cohesion of that family and that family's position in society. And so you stay together. And it was very rare that someone would move away. Now, it did happen, of course, but it was very rare. And if you did, then typically that person would be named from that city. So typically a name would be Jesus Bar Joseph, right? Jesus, son of Joseph. But if you moved away, no one would know who that is, and so they would name you of the city. And so now it becomes Jesus of Nazareth, right? And everybody would know that he is the out-of-town guy, right? You would be named with the addition of the town you are from. And so Saul from Tarsus lived in Jerusalem. But that was rare. And other people we meet in the Bible, right? People like Timothy, people like Silas, people like Joseph, or like Luke, right? Think about this, right? It wasn't Luke of Troas, right? You only are Luke of Troas if you're living someplace else, and they have to identify you from somebody else. And so people don't move. And when they do, they have to go back to their hometown for the census. And so Joseph and Mary, they are going back to Bethlehem when Jesus is born, right? And why is Jesus born? Well, think about this. If you're 9 months pregnant, if you're a 9-month pregnant woman and you're traveling 100 miles on the back of a donkey cart, you're going to pop out that baby, right? The baby is going to be born when you get there. And so Jesus is verse 4, chapter 2, it says, "So Joseph also went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David." Right? He went there to register with Mary, right? Who was pledged to be married to him, right? And was expecting a child. Verse 6, "While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born. And she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. And she wrapped him in clothes and placed him in a manger, because there was no guest room available for them." Now, think about this, right? When we think about the Christmas story, and we all know the Christmas story, and we think about the story, we think about the Christmas cards and the Christmas plays, I think about this, that the innkeeper is always kind of portrayed as this kind of mean, nasty fellow. "There's no room for you in here, right? I don't want you to be in here. You can't stay in here, or go out into the stables, get married." But think about this. You have to understand that in this day, in this period of time, there is no Holiday Inn, right? There's no Hilton. There's no Motel 6. But there are caravan stops. That is, when people travel, right? And remember the Bible, remember the area, right? There's two main roads, right? The VMRs and the King's Highway, and then you have these linking roads that go in between. And when people traveled, typically people would travel 30 miles a day. That is, you'd wake up in the morning, you'd eat breakfast, and you start walking at a normal place. And you walk about 3 miles an hour. And so by afternoon, you stop, you eat lunch, and then you start walking again until dinner. And so you would walk about 10 hours at 3 miles per hour, so about 30 miles a day, give or take, the train and all that. And that's simply the way people would travel. And so about every 30 miles or so, there would be these caravan stops where people could stay overnight. All right, and they were standard stopping places. And these caravan stops would be these walled compounds to keep the bad guys out. And you would go there, you would stop, the gates would be open, and you would enter into the compound. And when you entered into these compounds, you would have a big open air area where you would stay, right? It would be a big courtyard where you would stay, right? You take the harnesses and the equipments, all that would be taken off the animals, and the animals would be put on one side, and they would be fed, they would be taken care of, and then you would set up your little area where you would stay at night, right? You pick a little plot on the ground where you'd set up where you'd stay at night. And around the sides there would be walls, and along those walls would be the shops, right? There would be a kitchen for you to get food. There would be a blacksmith shop to, help fix your tools, equipment. There would be a feed shop for your animals. And so you would have everything that travelers would need on the inside, and you would make up your little camp, and you'd sit around and you'd eat, and it'd be a very social event, right? All the travelers would be there in this open courtyard, right? The meals would be served from the kitchen. Everyone would sit around and you would talk. And if you are traveling, right? If you're a traveler, then you would go to the next stop the next day, and you'd run into the same people. And so you'd have these conversations, and you would make friends. It would be this big social event. And the courtyards could probably hold somewhere around 100 people comfortably. Now, if it was raining, which was rare, it did happen, but it was rare given that desert climate. But there would be a smaller inside portion that you could go in, but it'd be very cramped, wouldn't hold nearly 100 people, but you could go in there, right? The animals would stay outside, people could go in there, standing room only. But typically, you would stay outside in the open air courtyard with everyone else, right? This group of 100 people in this open air place, right? And that would be the inn, if you will. And so Mary and Joseph arrive, right? And they're making up their area. They're talking to people that are around, and Mary says to Joseph, Joseph, it's time. And Joseph thought to himself, oh my, what am I going to do? And so he goes to the innkeeper and says, we've got a problem, right? My wife is about to give birth. And the innkeeper says, oh my, well, let me get my wife, right? She can help. Now, think about this. You don't want to give birth in a courtyard in front of 100 other people. And so what do you do? And so well, let me take you around back. Let me take you to the stables where you'll have some privacy, and it'll be a little warmer. It'll be comfortable, and my wife can help, and that'll be a nice private place for you, for Mary to give birth. And that is what the innkeeper does. Right? It's a very kind gesture that he does. Right? He's not a mean, evil innkeeper. He's giving him what is available. And so Mary gives birth to Jesus. And she wraps him in swaddling clothes, and they place him in a manger. Right? It is literally a feeding trough. Right? And they fill the feeding trough with hay, and they wrap Jesus in a little blanket, and they put him in that feeding trough. Now, if I were Mary, right, knowing that I'm going to give birth to the Son of God, right, if I have 9 months to think about this, right, what would my expectations be? Right, quite honestly, I don't think it would be this 100-mile ride on the back of a donkey cart, right, and giving birth in a stable out behind a caravan stop and putting my baby in a feeding trough, right? This is surely not her expectation. Well, we all know a story. The shepherds who were in the fields, they come by, they stop by, they see the baby. And then we have this in verse 21 of chapter 2. It says, on the 8th day, when it was time to circumcise the child, he was named Jesus, the name the angel had given him before he was conceived. Right? He is circumcised on the 8th day as required by the law of Moses. Verse 22, and when the time came for the purification rites required by the law of Moses. Now, what is that? What is purification rites? Well, that is 40 days after giving birth to a male child, a woman goes through a ritual. It's a rite of purification, right? And that incorporates her back into a functioning community, right? She has, after birth, she has 40 days with no responsibilities to anyone except the baby, right? There is no family responsibilities. There is no communal responsibilities. There's no religious responsibilities, right? It is just her and her newborn baby, right? It's a time for her to bond with her child. But at the end of that 40 days, life goes back to normal, and there is a rite of passage, a purification to do that. right? That's the rite of purification. It is 40 days for a male, 80 days for a female. And so if a woman has a daughter, then you get double the time. That's kind of nice. But at that time of purification, a sacrifice is to be made, right? And we read about that in Leviticus, right? And what's the sacrifice supposed to be? It's supposed to be a perfect, unblemished, 1-year-old lamb or goat. But if you are really poor and you cannot afford a 1-year-old lamb or goat, you can sacrifice 2 birds. And what do Joseph and Mary sacrifice? Verse 24, to offer a sacrifice in keeping with what is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of doves or 2 young pigeons. They offer 2 birds. It's the only indication that Joseph, Mary, and Jesus were a poor family. Now, it's popular to talk about them being a poor family, but this is the only indication we have that they actually are, right? They offer the offering of a very poor family, right? And that's the only way we know that they are a poor family. Well, verse 39, the purification over, it says this, says, when Joseph and Mary had done everything required by the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee to their own town of Nazareth. And the child grew and became strong, and he was filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was on him. Right? Jesus grew up like any normal little boy in Nazareth. And then we read in verse 41 that when Jesus was 12 years old, they went to Jerusalem for the Passover festival, right? Something that Mary, Joseph, and Jesus would do every year, right? They are in Jerusalem. They're there for 8 days for Passover, all right? And then they head back home. And what happens? Jesus turns up missing. Right? Joseph and Mary get up, get from Jerusalem. They get to Jericho, the first leg of their journey. They're preparing to stay for the night at the caravan stop in Jericho. And all of a sudden, they cannot find Jesus. And you got to imagine as a parent, right? They are frantic, right? And so they go back up the road from Jericho to Jerusalem, right? This is this 17-mile road, this 17-mile journey. And they're looking for Jesus all along the way with these vertical drops down the right-hand side. And they're looking down this canyon with this dry riverbed. And they're looking down at the rocks for Jesus. Frantic. They're worried that he die? What has happened to him? Right? He was with them when they left, and now he's not. What's the only thing that they could be thinking? Right? That he was fooling around with his friends and he fell off the cliff. And for 3 days, they searched for him on this 17-mile road until they finally get back up to Jerusalem. And they haven't found him. They don't know what to do next. And they're at the top of the mountain. And they're at the Mount of Olives, and they're looking in front of them. And what's in front of them 300 yards away? The temple. So what do? Right, their son has been missing for 3 days, and all of a sudden they see the temple in front of them. And the only thing they can think is, let's go to the temple and let's pray. I don't know what else to do, Mary. We got to go to the temple. We got to pray. And when they get there, here is Jesus, 12-year-old Jesus, sitting inside, talking to the men. Now, this is important because he's 12 years old. And what happens to a Jewish boy at 12 years old? Right? He's bar mitzvah, right? This rite of passage from childhood to adulthood. Right? You've been taught to read, you've been taught to write, and you demonstrate your ability to read by standing up in front of the whole congregation and reading your portion from the Torah. And now you can read the Torah, and you have been taught the Torah. So now you are accountable for your own relationship with God. You have gone from childhood to adulthood. Now, before that, your parents were accountable for you, but now you are accountable for yourself, right? It is this rite of passage into adulthood. And here is Jesus in Jerusalem right at that time, right? It's his rite of passage into adulthood. Well, he was ready to leave with Mary and Joseph and travel with this big group of people heading back north to Galilee, to Nazareth. He's out there playing with his other friends, right? They're tossing the ball or whatever young boys do. And as they're leaving, Jesus says, oh, man, I got some more questions. And so he goes back to the temple to ask some questions, thinking, you know what, I'll catch up with them in just a moment. But when he got back outside, all of a sudden, they were gone. Now, Think about this. When you were a child, what did your parents tell you to do if you were lost? Right? They told you, stay put and we will find you. Right? If you get lost, you stay put. Stay exactly where you are and we will find you. And so what did Jesus do? Right? He went back to the temple and he waited. He waited for his parents. Right? And when they find out that they're missing, right? They'll come back and they'll find me, right? That's what Jesus is thinking. And so he waited 3 days and he's talking with a man, and now he's a man himself, right? He is going through the rite of passage and he's talking with the man, and Mary and Joseph show up, right? And you could just imagine, right? As a parent, they are frantic. And they show up at the temple and they're ready to pay, and their eyes are bloodshot. They haven't slept in 3 days, and they see Jesus with the man. And Mary said in verse 48, right, when his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, right, and think about this. It's not, oh, son, right, why have you treated us this way? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you. No, it's not that at all. It's, what is wrong with you? Right, why did you do this? We were worried sick about you, Jesus. All of a sudden, right, all of the emotions that a parent has, right, you're not sure whether to be happy or to be extremely angry at that moment. And Jesus says that, right, only a 12-year-old boy could say, why were you searching for me? Right, why were you so worried about me? Right, he said, didn't you know I'd be at my father's house? Right, he said, you told me, right, if I was lost to stay put, right, and you'd come find me. So that's what I did, right? I got lost, so I went right back to where you told me to stay. I stayed put. Verse 50, but they didn't understand what he was saying to them. And then he went down from Nazareth with them and was obedient to him. Well, you bet he was, right? He wasn't able to sit for a week. You could imagine. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. In chapter 3, verse 1, right, we're going to pick up here next week when we come back. But it says this, it says in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. And so we have this another anchor in history, right? Jesus is now 30 years old. Right, we read in chapter 3 and verse 23 that Jesus himself was about 30 years old when he began his ministry. And so we have this age gap from age 12 to 30 transpires, right, between chapter 2 and chapter 3. There is this gap in history, right? These are the lost years of Jesus, as some have called it. Now, there have been some who have speculated that he went off to India and he learned all these esoteric stuff, but no, that's not what happened, right? He simply stayed in Nazareth. He apprenticed with his father, Joseph, and he lived in Nazareth, right? And think about this. Why don't we hear anything about him from ages 12 to 30, right? From chapters 2 to 3, right? From 12 years old to 30 years old. Why don't we hear anything from him? Well, he was probably grounded the entire time for what he had done, right? Just kidding. But that is the Gospel of Luke, chapters 1 and 2. Next time, we'll pick up in chapter 3 next week. God bless. See y'all later.